Historians. I'm your host, Heather Ashley, and welcome to another episode of Women of Her Story, a podcast dedicated to celebrating women who have made or are making their mark on our society. Interview remix, because I have your favorite co-host with me today. I have magical Mr. Mistopheles from the Broadway smash hit Cats. How are you doing today?
I'm just fine. That's me. And how are you doing?
I'm doing so well.
Perfect.
We have a very special guest today. Her name is Jenn Alford-Teaster, and she is running for state senate to represent District 8 in New Hampshire.
Woo!
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenn.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is great. So what is like the short version of that nickname?
You know, here's the thing. That's actually one of the characters in Cats. It's my favorite one. And it's funny because he found my cat ears that I used to wear when I would bartend that show. They're sparkly. And he was like, I don't want to relive Cats right now. And I was like, well, you're about to
later. You should mention that.
I had him on earlier. I might as well just for a little while, but not because we wanted. But that's what that looked like earlier. So
it's a journey. It's a journey.
It's a trip. We have fun. But we're here about you.
We are. There are so many places that we could start, but I think we should start with the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. You have 2 degrees, one in geography and one in public health. How did you arrive at the decision to work on those 2 vastly different subjects?
So how I made my way to the University of North Carolina. So I grew up here in New Hampshire, and I grew up with a mom who was a single mom. She had 3 kids before she was 18.
Wow.
I had my brother at 23. When we were very little, my dad had left us, and we ended up moving in with my grandmother, who had been widowed. And my mom and my grandmother, they worked minimum wage jobs to put food on the table for us. And when I turned 18, I had saved $265 working at a pizza place in downtown Durham, where the University of New Hampshire is, and moved to North Carolina because I had a friend there who was willing to give me a place to stay for a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I took my 2 suitcases, my $265. Second day I was down there, I got a minimum wage job working at a coffee shop, Tate Street Coffee House in downtown Greensboro.
Mm.
And I made $4.35 an hour.
Oh.
And I did that job for about a year, and I had passed out at work because I couldn't afford to eat every day.
My gosh.
The folks that I worked for had encouraged me to go to college. They had said, there's really no reason why you shouldn't be going to school. You're very smart, very driven, you work really hard. And I said, well, college is for rich kids. It's not something that people like me do. And in North Carolina at the time, it was $2,000 a semester for me to go to college. So I worked 2 to 3 jobs, put myself through my undergraduate degree, was exposed to geography in my sophomore year by a woman named Tracy Brown. She was an art teacher who used to come into the coffee shop. And when, at UNCG, you were required to kind of pick a major in your sophomore year. And I wasn't decided. And Tracy suggested that I try geography. She said, there aren't a lot of women in geography. You might find it interesting just knowing you. And I absolutely loved it. So I completely threw myself into the geography program and got an undergraduate degree in environmental studies, and then earned a scholarship for my first master's degree in applied geography with a postbaccalaureate in geographic information systems. And
wow.
I love geography. It's something that is just so, and it sort of naturally pairs with public health. So because it's, very community-based, systems-based, human-based work. And so when, after I had gotten my first master's degree, I worked at the fire department for a couple of years as a mapping specialist.
Very cool.
Home. Such an awesome job. I love that job.
That is so cool. You can't see our faces right now, but we're like,
yeah, can we get that?
It was such a great job. I love the Greensboro Fire Department. I was 26 when I first started working there, and they were, it was just such a great place to work. I mean, the people would give you literally the shirt off of their back and worked really hard. And I ended up moving. I had always wanted to come home to New Hampshire, and my husband got a job here in New Hampshire. We moved back to New Hampshire, and I ended up getting a second master's degree in public health because I had been working at Dartmouth in the geography department as a spatial analyst, studying healthcare issues with a particular focus on cancer care, and realized that I was needing some additional sort of context for the work to be able to apply geography to medicine. And so I got a second master's degree in public health from the University of New Hampshire. But I've been at Dartmouth for the last 14 years. I'm a senior scientist in the Geisel School of Medicine, and I study geographic access issues related to the delivery of healthcare, specifically cancer care.
So like what does that entail? What does that mean?
So thanks for asking. Not a lot of people ask me about my job as while I'm running for office. Which I think some of it is because it's such a niche place of study that it feels a little bit challenging for folks to kind of wrap their brains around. So it can mean lots of things. So traditionally we've studied a lot of retrospective data analysis, who's utilizing what healthcare services, what types of barriers and facilitators exist in order for people to get those services. Early on, when I had first moved into the program I'm in now, we had spent time focusing on utilization of screening and diagnostics for breast cancer diagnosis. So looking at the utilization of MRI versus mammography, PET and ultrasound, and at which stages would you need those, and which populations and risk populations are best served by having these different technologies available to them. Moved into tomosynthesis, which is the 3D mammography, who's getting access to these technologies, who benefits from them most, studying the proliferation of use of these technologies in the population to ensure that people are having equitable access to it. And my particular focus has been on characterizing geographic access. So if you are driving 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever hours to get treatment, which treatment courses are you more likely to choose or benefit from? So now,
that's so
go ahead.
interesting. I don't know that I've ever
thought too much about
that specific type of thing, and maybe that's from always being in a relative city center. So it's not with access to 7 hospitals, 2 of which are walking distance. So and just there's just things that I don't think I've ever crossed
too much
my mind before. It's very
so
interesting.
there are 5 different domains of access. Geographic access is one of them. When we look at urban communities, so we tend to focus on, for me anyway, rural communities, because we live in a rural state, and the cancer center that I work at has a predominantly rural community in Vermont and New Hampshire. So our catchment area is what it's called, Vermont and New Hampshire. And so I tend to look at the rural disparities in access that are impacted by geographic access, which also can be and are compounded by financial access issues. So when you're looking at an urban center, an urban environment, one of the first paper that I was the first author on, I looked at the difference between closest versus actual use in facilities, because we often make the assumption that people use closest facility. That may or may not be true, and it can be highly dependent on where you work, and so sometimes people tend to align where they're going out of convenience. Sometimes it's tied to insurance coverage and things of that nature. So, and then also just the method. So I, early in my career, focused a lot on the technology and the methods used to assess geographic access. So improving working with a really well-known geographer named Fa-Wei Wang, who developed this method called the two-step floating catchment method to estimate supply, demand, and then that's based off of travel time distance, road travel time distance. And in those models, because of HIPAA laws, it can be challenging to get access to individual level data, so we know the actual address of where people are, and that also often gets estimated at census levels and centroids of those geographic boundaries. So it introduces a lot of, bias into the amount of travel time. So being able to have record level data, individual level data, and looking at actual utilization versus what we consider potential utilization has impacts on people's behavior and way they access healthcare services.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Sorry.
Very
there's a lot.
informative. That was great.
There
I
was,
really enjoyed
there's
that.
so many wheels turning and
That
like
was-
little light bulbs going off in my brain that are like,
So
oh.
that's like the first part of the portfolio work I've done. The second part now we've moved into qualitative research, focus groups, talking to patients, talking to providers, talking to them about what their barriers for implementation for particular screening services. So some now is lung cancer screening. Also moved into recently survivorship, cancer survivorship, and the transition from active treatment to surveillance and how that coordination of care happens between radiation and medical oncologists to the primary care
Right.
for surveillance. And at what point, particularly in rural and isolated rural communities, does that occur? And how we can examine how the use of telehealth and telemedicine can make the transition easier for the patient. So I have a large body of work behind me in large quantitative retrospective data sets, and now it's moved into some of the qualitative to provide some of the direct texture with some of the patients and providers that exist in New Hampshire and Vermont.
Wow. Man. So that's what you guys are working on, or that's what you're working on now within
Yes.
that. That's so interesting.
Very
Of course,
Wow.
with COVID, now we're, looking in the era of COVID and exploring and studying the proliferation of use of telehealth and telemedicine and teleoncology
Right.
in our communities, and exploring how we can take telehealth and telemedicine out of the context of COVID and find the ways in which it's most beneficial for patients post-pandemic. Because, some cancers can be chronic, and being able to, give access to care directly in someone's home where they're at can be beneficial for them. It's a matter of figuring out at which stage in the continuum of care it's most beneficial. So it's also one piece of our portfolio that has shifted this year, which, has been interesting. So,
Yeah, especially thinking about someone having to drive like 5 hours for an appointment, and that's not going to be a short appointment. That's going to be a long appointment. So they're going to end up having to, most likely, I would assume, get a hotel room, or there's just so many of these other steps, or someone else needs to be with them to like make sure no one's falling asleep while they're driving, because 10 hours of driving in one day is too much for anyone to do, especially when you're going through stuff,
Yes. Well, we typically for our analysis would truncate the travel time up to 3 hours, because we would assume that 3 hours might be the maximum time that someone might be willing to drive in a single day to receive care. And so outside of 3 hours, is sort of burdensome. And also, when we're looking at, medical tourism, people who go out of the country to receive care, I mean, those are certain things that we incorporate into our analysis. But yeah, so we would often truncate it at 3 hours.
Still too much. That's
Nice.
that's still too much time in general. But yeah, that's so interesting, and that's really, I like that. I was like, these are two very different like subjects. How did you get into them? And you're like, well, actually, they're very much hand in hand, and that's so interesting that there's a whole section of study of all these things that have just never occurred to me.
Yeah, medical geography, healthcare, health services research, these are fields that which help us to understand how our social, economic, political context affect the way that people receive and access healthcare. It's something I feel really passionate about. I live in a rural community. I grew up in a rural state. If, in terms of access, and, another dimension is supply. So if you don't have access to it, we know this about people who live in rural and isolated rural communities. By the time they do end up getting treatment for care, they come sicker, they come with more illnesses, and so it ends up being more expensive and more difficult to treat, and they tend to have more adverse health outcomes. So this is something, and this is a way in which I am able to contribute to improving the context for people.
Absolutely. Did you ever think that you would end up running for a political office?
No, I no. So I had realized, so there's this, I have a daughter, her name's Birdie. She is just like a treat. I love her so much. She will be 5 here soon. And she goes to daycare about a few miles down the street from me. And now there's like a main street. I say main street, just literally the only thing on this main street is like a Dunkin' Donuts, a pizza joint, a couple of abandoned buildings, a few homes, and then like there's like the volunteer fire department, library, a church, and then my daughter's daycare. And so like I would drop my daughter off at daycare, and I would then go get myself a Dunkin' Donuts, because God bless the Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hampshire thing.
Yeah, America runs on it, apparently.
Everybody runs on that. My campaign runs on Dunkin' Donuts. True story. So I would drop Birdie off at school and then go up to the Dunkin' Donuts before I go home and grab myself a cup of coffee. And I would always see this woman there. And she was mom of a boy that Birdie went to school with, Andrew. And she'd work all day long. And it reminded me of my grandmother, who would get up at 4 a.m. and all 4 of us kids ready for school, and then go work at the Burger King all day. Mm. And I thought, how is it possible that I'm living in the state and basically this woman is recreating the childhood I had with this young boy, Andrew, right? And like, I'm thinking, Andrew and Birdie are the same age. They deserve the same context to thrive in. They deserve to have access to a context in a community that will help them reach their potential regardless of what their individual incomes are. Absolutely. So I thought about her a lot, and I would be in the woods, and then one day I thought, between my lived experience and my professional understanding of how communities and contexts work, will have a capacity that other people running for office just wouldn't be able to speak to. Because I could speak to the lived experience of being, housing insecure, food insecure, and also how a well-funded public education system, because I grew up in a wealthy district, I just was poor, made all the difference. So by the time I got to college, I was more than ready to succeed, evidenced by the fact that I earned a scholarship to my first master's degree and my postbac. So I realized I needed to put my life, my story, my body on the line for people to see that return on investment that these things made in my early life for Andrew. So I decided to run. I had no idea what I was doing.
Amazing.
But if you think about the arc of my life though, like I grew up poor without any sort of investment other than the community in me as a young person. My home life was difficult. We struggled, and honestly, there was not much expectation for what would happen to me once I left the house. And yet here I am, a senior researcher at an Ivy League institution. It's almost the arc of that is incredible. So I thought, well, if I can pull that off for myself, I can pull this off for my community.
Yes,
right. So I can apply that same drive and energy and resolute, devotion to helping my community thrive. So I just started going at it. I started organizing people, doing fundraising in the community, knocking doors, which was my favorite thing to do, to knock doors, because District 8 is a really large district. It's 24 towns. Wow. So there are 24 senators in New Hampshire, 24 Senate seats in New Hampshire, and they fill about 55,000 people per district. My district is very rural and it's very spread out. For those who might be familiar with New Hampshire geography, it's sort of central western part of New Hampshire.
Okay.
And I live in Sutton, which is sort of on the periphery, but it's a small rural town. I mean, more people at Dartmouth Hitchcock than there are in my town, right? So, I just threw myself into the work, and the New Hampshire Democratic Party was very supportive and helping me to figure out how to do the fundraising, how to, I have a couple of really good friends I leaned on during 2018 cycle that I met through the process, Ben Ernst and Nick Taylor, like they're fantastic, and just learned how to run a campaign, learned how to fundraise. Emily's List was incredibly supportive. I took her class on how to do fundraising. I learned I had a skill I didn't even know I had previously. I learned how to fundraise. I raised $154,000 last cycle,
Wow.
which is
That's
insane. That's
a
what
lot
it
of money.
takes in order.
And that's a lot of faith for people like that.
Yeah.
That's an indicator that like you like people want you in this position. Like that's such a huge indicator that like that support is there, not just verbally, but literally people are like, take my money.
Well, some of the things that were really, I mean, I have to say some of the best, most meaningful contributions come from people like the guy I moved to North Carolina with. He still makes contributions to my campaign.
Oh.
The guy I work, the folks I work for at the coffee shop, I worked there for 10 years. He makes contributions to my campaign. Like people that I've worked with or for, like to me, the fact that they believe in me and know me so well that they want me to be making decisions on behalf of the state of New Hampshire, like just feels really potent and powerful, and the reason why that matters to me is because I feel like it's really hard, and I can say this as somebody who had never thought to run for office, like especially now there's so much distrust in people who put themselves forward to want to run for office that it's hard to believe that people are doing it for the right reasons. Running for office is often seen as something that people who want to aggrandize their sense of self do in order to feel self-important. I see running for office as a relay race that you are jumping in to do your part for your community. I feel like it's particularly important in my circumstance because the state of New Hampshire, it's such an impact and an influence on me as a young person as to why I'm be successful now. And I feel like it's really, really hard for people who are in the fight to fight for these things, see that return on investment. So it feels incredibly important to me to show people that I know in the slog of your day-to-day, when you're looking at just the horrible things that come across the news, that you're not making a difference. But I'm here to say you made people like you were doing this work when I was a young child, and now look at the return on that. And so it's working. There are people out there that will succeed because you put that work in. And it may be hard. It's very hard. It can be very discouraging. It's really important that that it makes a difference. And so for me, being able to run for office is completely centered on that. And so for people who have known me since I was young and struggling, to believe in me with such devotion that they continue to make contributions to the campaign long after we've been in regular contact tells me that there's like a values consistency that it's really important for other people to see. This was not born out of some sense of needing something to fulfill me. It's not for me. This is for the community. So that's where the fundraising can be really impactful and meaningful for me. And so I never thought I'd run for office. And, even now when people call me a politician, I'm like, I'm a scientist. I'm not a politician. I mean, part of that is redefining what it means when we say that word. For me, it's a cycle. So I lost my race by 647 votes. And this race, so no Democrat has held this seat in 2 decades because it's a very gerrymandered district. And so when the gentleman who's a moderate Republican retired from his seat, he had been holding it for 16 years, the race became wide open. And Representative Linda Tanner in 2014 ran, and she lost by about 13.5 percentage points. And then John Garvey, who is a well-known lawyer here, mediator, he ran and he lost by about 6.5 percentage points. And then when I ran in 2018, I lost by 2 points. So this race is achievable. And I think what Linda and John had started, and that would my personal story and my professional career can do is take it over the finish line. And because I was not active in New Hampshire politics, nobody knew who I was in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So I did hard work of, just being constantly out there and available. Put my cell phone number on all of my literature so people can call me directly. I feel really passionate that elected officials should be personally available to the voters and constituents. Because this roles don't belong to the person holding them, they belong to the people they represent. So for me, if you're going to be out there, you should be whole and that you should be available. So yeah, I mean, it's not something. So for me, it's about sort of changing what we consider can be
Absolutely.
Politician. And then also, I didn't win my race, but two of my closest girlfriends decided to run for office afterwards, and they'd never considered it. One of my closest friends, she won her primary and is in a very safe Democrat, so she will be the next Senate District 15 senator in New Hampshire. I'm very excited about this. And then my friend Leah, who ran for executive council, came in third, but it was a highly contested race. So I feel really proud. And I had been very intentional in the last cycle to be very prolific on social media to show other young women, young people, how you can run for office while you have a family and a career, and that it's fun and this is joyful work. And giving to your community is more than just like complaining about what's wrong with it. It's also about celebrating the beauty that exists within your community. So that feels have been able to achieve.
Absolutely.
I would love for you to win, and then I want to move to your district. I am so jealous for the inevitable. Like you win, and I'm just like, I feel so inspired. I want that ambition. Like
if I don't know if you can feel his energy through this.
So inspiring. He just said so many things, and I'm like, I want to vote for you now.
Thank you so much.
So that was just so inspiring and moving, and I just and that level of ambition, and also being able to personally contact you. I don't even know, like I couldn't even. When you were saying that almost seems like a thing from like the Twilight Zone, when like from the 1940s, when like the people would talk to the person higher up. That doesn't seem feasible, but we got in contact with you through Twitter.
Yeah,
and then, you're saying all these things about the phone, the phone call, and I'm just
being accessible is so important, especially
for young people like us.
Yeah, and even just in general, like in the day and age of with technology that we are now, there's a lot. I feel like it should be easier to contact people than it is, when with like representatives, and you just feel like so many times it's never even acknowledged, or you get the like bulk email response back, like, thank you for your input, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, that's not anything. I know you're not even looking at this.
Yeah.
And
one of the things that's challenging about that is like, just as somebody who had not run for office before, like, it's almost like there's a wall between, an information wall between what you see in the media about who these people are and then who they actually are. And one of the things that I feel adamant about is that you bring your whole self to the work. So like one of the things that I really want to challenge is this idea that any one single candidate can fix it all. We all have something to add in the collective, in this work together, and that a legislature body of representatives should be representative of the underlying population. And with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I mean, she is an incredible woman, a powerhouse of a woman, and all of our body autonomy rests on the shoulders of this one woman.
Yeah.
And for me, we should all take personal responsibility in ensuring our women's health care is available to us. All the other work that she'd done, like the fact that women can have a mortgage without having a male co-signer. I mean, incredible ways in which she touched our lives. And so we all have a shared responsibility in creating the world that we want to live in. And it should encompass the reality of the individuals we vote to office. And so for me, being personally available is so people know I'm like a real person. Like I had a gentleman, and I had I've not had a lot of people reach out to me, but I've had a couple of really powerful experiences through that. So there was this gentleman, Harold, who reached out to me and had said, hey, I saw your stuff. I'd like to meet you and talk to you about climate change. And I thought, okay, you know, he lives in this really rural town, Washington, New Hampshire, which is beautiful. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to be canvassing in Washington. I'll come by, you know, at like 3:30 or whatever, 3 o'clock, and we'll have some time to talk. And I show up, and it's like a single wide trailer, door's kind of ajar, nobody's there. And I was like, well, the cat comes running out, knock, nobody's there. I thought, well, I'll just go knock a couple of doors up the street, and then I'll come back. And then I came back. He was there, and so was his wife, and they had just gotten back from the VA, and he had received dialysis for some liver issues he was having, and invites me in. He starts talking about climate change, which was really just a ruse to get me to come to his house so he could talk to me about the economic situation that him and his wife are in, because she had had a very debilitating illness that put her in a coma for 6 months, and they lost their house. And then he is, retired service member who has, very serious liver condition and, kidney condition. And they feel like their economic situation is like unfixable. They wanted to show me pictures of their grandchildren.
Oh my God.
They wanted me to look and answer for whether or not I would look out for them.
Man.
And so Laura and Harold and I have remained friends. I was so overcome by that reach, and Laura was standing in her living room and she said, I know that our situation won't be fixed, but I want you to see them, and I want you to know they matter, and I want to know that they matter to you. I mean, it makes me teary-eyed to think about it now.
I'm getting all emotional over here.
And she's still, she's had a couple new grandbabies. She'll send me pictures of the new grandbabies. Like, they're just a really sweet and lovely family. And I feel like, through a series of health issues that have caused them to experience extreme economic dysfunction in their family, they're not able to recover. But their sole concern was to make sure that they knew that if they voted for me, that I would keep those children in mind, and so for me, like, that's beauty in making myself personally available to people. They offer themselves completely. And so I think of them when the work is tough, because it can be very difficult. So the ability to put myself out there personally has impacted me as well as the electorate.
It's like you receive what you give. So if you make yourself available, people will also make themselves available and be like, all right, if you're going to do that, let me tell you what's up. And this is why I actually feel X, Y, and Z. And this is why this is where my circumstance has put me. What are the things that you will consider while you're making decisions? That's so important.
Yeah.
That's so important.
Well, the work of politics in legislating is about the people who live under the laws of the land, and they should reflect our highest values. And they can't reflect our highest values if you don't draw to mind the people who are impacted by them. So, for me, like, running for office, like, I have been impacted by many things at our state in New Hampshire, and the drive and the commitment to the work is fueled by the people that I met and meet when I canvass and do the campaign work. So I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist. I want, when people think of politicians moving forward to lay this groundwork, it really can be a whole person who, wholly wants the, community to succeed.
Absolutely. On the token of people being weary of politicians and thinking they're career politicians, or just looking for a power grab, or that they're out of touch, anything like that, what are some, you've touched on a few ways, but what are some ways that you are active in the community that you're wanting to represent?
Oh, that's such a great question. So most recently, I have signed up to be, and I am, a supervisor of the checklist in Sutton. So what that means is I help register new voters. And so in New Hampshire, we have same-day voter registration. So on, at the primary, I'm an election official. And so and for those listening, because I am a candidate, I don't count races. So there are 3 supervisors of the checklist. There's 1 moderator who kind of orchestrates the whole layout. For me, being involved in the election process, making sure that it's accessible for folks, especially during the pandemic, where absentee voting has seen a dramatic increase, is really important. And so because of my work in public health and being able to help our small town, which has 1,800 registered voters, set up our town hall to be able to accept and process ballots and people as they come in to vote in a way that maximizes infection control has been really important to be able to do this cycle and to get people registered. It's always like the first person I registered to vote, I was so excited, and they had just moved here and were a little bit freaked out by my enthusiasm. Like, you have no idea how great this is. Like, you just moved here and you're registering to vote. Like, sometimes it can be really challenging to put that as electricity, sign up to vote when you move, so just very exciting. So I've been participating in that way in the supervisor checklist. After I lost my election, because we were in a presidential cycle, we had a lot of Democratic candidates come here. And so it was really important to me to continue to elevate the issues in our district for those presidential candidates. So I would often either have lunch or dinner with candidates and talk to them about the issues of District 8. Some of them actually came here a few times. Elizabeth Warren, I introduced her at a few events. She'd come and had small group meetings. Because one of the things that I really want to dismantle for folks is that rural communities are not monoliths. There's a lot to be offered in our communities and also a lot of challenges, but it's also a really wonderful community. So we need to advocate for them as the way they actually look and feel, not by trends and statistics, which can be beneficial. That book, Flyover Country, you ever read this book?
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, so it really does a good job of characterizing how people see rural communities from a 3,000-foot view, basically, as just being broken and uneducated and unfixable
and whatever.
Yeah. So I often talk to presidential candidates about that, so they could have an actual sense of what it was like to be in rural communities, New Hampshire anyway. And also, over the years, I've volunteered at our church's homeless shelter for 8 years, which gave me a really interesting perspective on the shifts from the 2008. So prior to 2008 financial collapse, we saw a lot of people working 2 and 3 jobs that just could not afford first and last month's rent, living in our shelter. And it was an overnight shelter, so they couldn't stay during the day. Also the president of our church's Relief Society. I'd been on the board of the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. I wrote a policy paper on equal pay in New Hampshire, interviewing 200 some odd people across different demographics about what they consider the most important influential issues in women's equality. And equal pay was the top one, and we were successful in getting a law passed in 2014 to ensure that pay equity is implemented, so people would no longer be punished if they shared their pay with colleagues, because that's one way in which women would not know they were being paid disproportionate. Right. That being pay increases and differential had to be based on bona fides, actual things that you can tie, not preferences,
right.
Or assumptions about people's home lives. So I was really proud of that.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I do lots of stuff.
What you're saying is you're active in your community.
Yeah, I'm very active in my community.
So what you're saying is you're not all talk.
No, I'm definitely not all talk. I mean everything I say, and I follow through and care very much and care through action. Action is my love language, they would say. So
it really it sounds like it, because it's based on the entire trajectory of your life that you have spoken on. It's very much based on action,
Yes.
you know, continue. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to do this. Okay, well, now I'm going to do this. And it doesn't sound like there's a lot of wavering. It seems to be a good, a large amount of, this is what I want to happen, so I'm gonna make it happen. Instead
Well,
of,
that's
you know?
that's sort of that is drive. I mean, I often talk about working towards making sure that the impact matches my intentions. You know, my intentions are to do good in the world, good to take, to help leave a mark in my small energy signature in the world that would improve the lives of those around me. And so I work really hard to try to match intention with my impact, and so, um, on the topic of my life trajectory, so I love Thich Nhat Hanh. Are you familiar with this Buddhist monk?
I don't think so, no.
No.
So he talks about this idea of composting pain. So, you turn, pain into flowers, you turn pain in, so for me, early part of my life was very painful. I mean, I struggled a lot. And I mean, with with family dysfunction and poverty, and then moving to a state where I knew one person and had a place to stay for 2 weeks and completely building a life from nothing. So I experienced a lot of difficulty and trauma early in my childhood, and so for me, the most important way in which I heal from that is by using that pain and energy to help make sure that it doesn't happen to other people. So it's composting the pain into flowers and goodness in the world,
I
so
love
That's
that.
really
I've
inspirational.
I've never heard that type of phraseology, I guess, in composting it, because I feel like, at least, let's say in the arts, people are like, pain and suffering helps you create good art, and you could blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not a healthy way to phrase that, because then people think they have to go through pain in order to create
yeah,
something good. But it's not so much that the pain itself, like going through general pain, is what helps you create. It's or just create your life, create your flowers, whatever. It's what you're doing with that pain, and if you're letting it grow into something else, or if you're letting it sit as like a dark tumor in your chest that just like weighs you down. That's such
yeah.
a
I mean, for me, you know, it, I would have loved to have a childhood that felt normal, whatever that feels, whatever that means. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I would have loved to have a childhood where I was embraced and cherished as a young person. In my own family, I would have loved to not have been full of shame, and with the fact that we, used food stamps and welfare. Like, I would have. I mean, that's not something I look back on and feel that I am glad that happened to me. It's just, that is what it is. And so
Right.
for me, like, I have a few options in the world about what I do with that. And, and sometimes it gets me. And then also I remember, like, look at all the good I've done in the world for myself. Like, what a gift would be to be able to do that for others in a big way, and like, do I have that capacity? It's like a personal challenge. Like, it's like a healing transformation to be able to help other people so they don't suffer. And so, pain and suffering is inevitable in living. I mean, that's just how it is, like, it's, for me, it's like what you can and choose to do with that, and so I'm very open about that pain and suffering. I don't hide it. I don't, I've done the work of integrating it into my story. It's not all of who I am. It is a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And when I can, I use that to advocate for other people, to say you're not alone, and that the reason why I'm advocating for these things is because I know how difficult they can be. Going to the State House and advocating for the expansion of DCYF workers, because I was a child in need of services as a young person in New Hampshire. Like, saying to legislators, this matters because look what you create in the world when you invest in these things. And so, like, I received these services through the Division of Child, Youth, and Family Services. And if I had not received them, would I be here today? Uncertain.
Yeah.
Isn't this what you want when you advocate for these things? You want a happy, healthy adult who contributes to their environment in a way that makes things better. So like that's the point of all this work. And so, for me, there's a sense of empowerment in being able to utilize what is, so,
What
there's that.
Yeah. What advice do you have for someone going through a similar upbringing and like, going through the turmoil of being paycheck to paycheck, having to ask like, ask for help? What sort of advice do you have for someone who is going through those sorts of low points right now, who feel like no one's investing in them?
Yeah. So I think that sometimes like what in the moments where I was like, sort of stuck or rudderless or feeling very alone or was alone. I mean, not just feeling it, I was alone. Cried myself to sleep because I was hungry and afraid, like a very real place I was in. I think as human beings, we're designed to keep going forward. I mean, we are designed to survive. We will fight death. We will fight, perishing, like that's, I would lean into that because that's your, I often would describe to people that's, I would say I have a strong pilot light. Like we all have a pilot light. Sometimes it flares, sometimes it kind of diminishes, no matter how small it gets, don't forget it's there. Like don't forget it's there. And and another thing that has helped me through the years as well too is realizing how it is to be here breathing in the moment. Because if you think about all that has had to be in order to make you who you are, to sit in this moment, it's pretty remarkable. And it's easy to lose sight of that, and so, feel the pain, feel the grief, find the thing to do that's going to improve even for that moment. So small little steps. I often do that when I feel frustrated, small little bits of progress sometimes, and they're not like grandiose things. I think sometimes people tend to look for these like monumental milestones in their life to continue to move forward. But sometimes, like I was having a pretty crappy week last week, feeling a little overwhelmed, scared because I can't go knock doors. I'm doing phone calls. Then I got this note in the mail from a gentleman I canvassed 2 years ago. I'd spent, 30, 45 minutes at his door. He was an independent voter with pickup politics, a former geographer, going through cancer treatments. And we spent a good amount of time just talking about how frustrated we were and are with politics, but also how these conversations are so important and that we both wanted to create a world we were proud of. And I hadn't seen this gentleman, Andrew, for those 2 years, and I got a letter in the mail, just a letter in the mail saying, thank you for running again. I voted for you then, I'm going to vote for you again. So like that was a seed, right? So like I think of these things as like little seeds you plant along the way. And how would I have known that 2 years later, in the moment when I needed it, I was going to get that in the mail? So like, plant the seeds of the things you want to sprout later, and
water
and
occasionally.
I mean, as a person, like you are that, and not everything's going to be a milestone moment every day. Sometimes the milestone moment is putting your feet on the floor to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And those things are meaningful. And so for me, I just remind myself that, sometimes a little bit of progress is all it really takes to keep moving. And I can get overwhelmed if I start to think about monumental shifts, large that I want to move in this world, and it feels unachievable. But if you dial back, looking at the tiny steps, that can be really impactful. Like that Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Keep that in mind. I do that a lot. I keep that in mind. A little thing. What is that little thing you can do right now that, sort of makes a little bit of progress? And sometimes it's just resting and drawing back and observing and saying, am I on the right path? Am I making the impact I want? If I'm not, how should I reorient and reconsider? And yeah, everybody goes through tough times. I mean, everyone, and I've seen some dark times and I've seen some pretty incredible times, but that's like the arc of every person's life. So you're not alone. Do what is meaningful to you to make progress that you will be proud of. That's the advice I would offer.
Yes, that is excellent advice. And I've just like stored 15 nuggets of that within, I always say I have a little man in my brain, Steve, who is like going through the files, and he's just filed away
Everything, I
all
know.
of these little things.
So motivational. I feel driven. I feel
he's like ready to go do a bunch of stuff.
I know,
right
I
now.
feel so hopeful. And I don't, everything you say just keeps this lasting effect on me, where it's just like, it's not like you said earlier, everything just seems so bleak, but it's really not. It's such a narrative that they try to drive, but
yeah,
you paint this positive image, and I just, like, we just have to continue doing what we're doing.
It's the relay race
and
that
making
you were
that
saying.
effort. Yeah, we just have to keep running.
And
I just get sometimes I just
sometimes
don't
you get
feel
with
like
it. That's
running.
when you pass the baton.
No, sometimes
That's the impact.
30
Like,
miles further. So sometimes
yes,
you move the finish line to a whole other place, and then it's like,
exactly.
why do I want to keep running? And then you hear, I made it to the finish line, or like the finish line, it's actually not that far. Or if you skip a quarter of the way there, like you know, it's just something like that.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, but like the impact this conversation is having on your energy, I mean, that energy already exists inside of you, that hope, that drive, that you just, and this is where I feel like in moments where you're having connection with people and you feel that sense of rejuvenation, it's because you want to be rejuvenated, because you know it exists.
Yes.
And sometimes you do that for other people.
Yes.
And sometimes, you know, you need it done for you. So like, this is a shared value. This is a shared value that we believe in the world that we live in, and we believe we have some small amount of control to be able to make it a better place. And you know, it won't happen overnight. It happens in these interactions, and then we cascade those interactions. So I'm speaking to what already exists inside of you. It's just a matter of you sharing that with other people when you move through the world.
It's untapped, and I guess it's not, no one's tapping it, and you're saying all these things, all these buzzwords, and I'm just reacting.
Buzzwords,
like,
yeah.
Oh, this is so good. Yes, hope.
Well, speaking of hope, with your background in public health, I'm sure you have a ton of ideas and plans related to the pandemic. What are some things you'd like to implement that are going to keep us moving in the right direction, or like turn us into moving into the right direction?
So for me, when I'm thinking about the pandemic, it's largely shaped by the work that I'm doing. So the exploratory work in the early response research on the use of telehealth and telemedicine and teleoncology. So for me, what that means in our rural communities, building out the infrastructure that would allow us to deliver healthcare in a way that's stable and consistent in the infrastructure. So we've had some CARES Act funding delivered to New Hampshire that would allow us to build out infrastructure in a couple of the small towns. But for me, when I look at broadband access, broadband infrastructure, it really is, to me, become, you know, the equivalent of roads. I mean, need it in order to access, you know, the use of remote education right now. We need it for people who are working from home. I mean, we just had the internet fritz on us, you know, so like, so it touches all areas of our lives. And in telehealth, telemedicine, being able to reach populations as a means in their homes as a means for infection control is one thing that I really want to work on should I get elected in the state Senate, is to ensure that that infrastructure exists so we can deliver care in a way that's meaningful and responsive to the individuals who need it.
Yeah, he's like, oh my God, she has to get elected.
You won. That's it. I'm designing it now. I can't wait any longer. I'm so sorry. I know there's a whole democratic process, but I can't wait any longer.
He's like, can I just place her?
Yeah, we'll just, it's two of us. We decided.
Yeah, that's fine. It works, right?
So
that's
good.
legal.
So good. So many.
You have to be a New Hampshire eligible voter. I do appreciate your vote of confidence.
Oh, so much. Yeah.
Well, as a New Hampshire public school alumni, you've mentioned you're so proud of, you know, what you've been able to do coming out of these schools. You are passionate about evening out the inequalities. What are some ways you hope to make this happen?
So one of the biggest priorities of my work as a candidate for Senate, and hopefully would be senator, is to make the funding of our public education fair. So the funding of our public education now is currently done by predominantly off of the backs of taxpayers who are living on fixed incomes. And this is particularly problematic in areas where we have, you know, property poor towns. So like my town, Sutton, for example, where my golden retriever's barking.
Oh, puppy!
Yay!
So, 1998, there was a lawsuit against the state of New Hampshire called, I don't even know what he's barking at. So I might let him outside.
Talk about dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was something in 2018 I did a lot of. I canvassed, and because I wanted to show people how hard I was working, I took pictures of people's dogs and animals across the district and would post them on social media because voters didn't want to have their pictures online. So I'd say, well, but could I take a picture of your dog or cat? And like, people loved it. I loved it. It made it a lot more fun. You know, I had this like great catalog of like dogs of District 8. My last mailer for the district, I had 24 boxes, 24 images, and they were all animals from around the district. And then I was in the middle with Doc, who used to go canvassing with me.
Oh my
Animals
God.
played a very important role in my campaign in 2018.
He's like, all right, I got my shout out.
Oh
All
my
right.
goodness. Yeah.
He's very happy. Like, Mom, don't forget to mention me. But I have two other dogs. I have a Aussie named Pepper, and then a new rescue Yorkie named Samson. I've never had a small dog. I'm very big dog energy. This dog is amazing. It's like so snuggly. So anyway, on the topic of public education in New Hampshire, so in 1998, there was, so in New Hampshire, it's mandated in our state constitution that each child receives an adequate education. Definition of adequate has been debated in the courts of New Hampshire, and the last time that was debated was in 1998, which now the state of New Hampshire contributes about $3,500 to $3,700 per pupil for education. So in actuality, the cost of per pupil for education is about $15,000 to $16,000 a year.
Yeah.
So that difference ends up getting made up at the local level by property taxes.
Right.
So, we have differing tax rates per town. So those differing tax rates, depending on whether or not you have property rich or property poor towns, mean you can pay a disproportionate amount of taxes. So like so what ends up happening is we end up with a scenario for which people who are living on fixed incomes who cannot keep up with the rise of property taxes and say, well, I don't have any kids in the school district. Why am I paying for this? And so we end up with a narrative that's, we've got people living on fixed incomes against children, which is not the conversation we should be having, right?
No.
So for me, children should be getting an adequate education, a well-funded public education, no matter what zip code they live in New Hampshire. So one ways in which we could do that is to ensure that the state pays 2/3 of the cost of the education and reduce the amount of burden on the local taxpayer, because we do not have consistent tax rate base across the state of New Hampshire. So for me, fighting for equity means fighting for equity and funding in education. So because I've seen that personally, I've experienced that in my lived experience, but also know that in my studies that a public education is one of the strongest return on investments, both in terms of economic prosperity for communities and also health outcomes in all other areas of people's lives.
Yeah.
So for me, building equity in how we fund public education in New Hampshire is a priority for me. And it is a priority for a lot of people in New Hampshire. So I've been endorsed by the NEA, the National Educators Association in New Hampshire. I am a very strong advocate for that. So that's what I prioritize equity.
I've always thought it's so crazy the way that school districts operate in those terms. So I grew up in Texas. It's a similar sort of, it's funded by the whatever school town you're in, and even sometimes within the city itself. There's like a line where some people don't go to that school and some people go. It's literally just if you're inside of this one thing. And then so my school district was like a destination town. People would move there to go to this school district because it was well funded, and there's all kinds of opportunities from the arts all the way through like a full aquatic center for the high school, which is crazy. That's insane. An indoor aquatic center, what? And it's something where people would move to that area. I don't understand who came up with this system.
Well, it happens a lot. It happens in New Hampshire. I mean, people move from school district to school district to be able to ensure that their kid gets an education that allows them to meet their potential. And I think what that does and it has a tremendous impact on, our rural communities, because people don't move there because the tax base is so high. They have difficulty, keeping people in New Hampshire because they feel like there are only limited amounts of places where they can move to and be able to afford the housing. So it has an impact, much greater impact, alongside of whether or not children are getting the education for which our Constitution mandates.
Yeah.
And so this and to me it's about making investments. So we're making an investment in these children, we're making an investment in the future of New Hampshire. That's why when I talk about this with people and legislators, and I often will say, like, you are looking at that strong return on investment. We need this for other people. So that's where the embodiment of my lived experience matters when I talk about my professional knowledge and understanding of how a well-funded school system makes an impact on communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have mentioned your daughter and your friends and colleagues and bosses from times past and your husband. So it sounds like you have a good support system around you. Has that helped you absorb the chaos when you feel like you're going a little crazy?
Oh, yes. So, yes. And actually, my campaign manager who's listening now, Vedika Gopal, she's an incredible human being. Yes. I mean, this work cannot be done without the support of people who love you. I mean, we had a phone bank here of 10 plus people yesterday and called over 2,700 people. And, my husband was making food, making chili. He'd made like a venison pulled meat sandwich for folks. We had the caucus campaigns director here. We had, friends, close friends. My friend who just now won her primary was here doing phone banking for us. And there's this kind of work, this kind of race requires a lot of investment of time, self, family. I, take time off from work to be able to achieve goals of campaign. If I, when I win, hopefully if I win, I will work part-time in order to, because the Senate in New Hampshire only gets paid $100 a year. It's essentially volunteer work.
What?
Yeah.
No.
But I don't even think Bloomberg or whoever's the mayor, De Blasio, I don't even think he makes that much money.
Still.
That's
I don't
crazy.
know.
$100 a year.
I feel like that's really bad.
That's
all the same.
literally
That's
volunteer work.
It is. Well, and so this is why we tend to have a legislature that's older. It's mostly retired, average age is 62, wealthy and retired, because the only people who run for office are people who can afford it. And so this was, a very driving factor for why I'm running. Like, it's not a citizen legislature if it only represents one portion of our demographic. So for me, having women who have children and are holding a career, are able to hold these roles and to be able to show people how it's done. I mean, people say, why would you spend your entire adult life building a career for which you have a middle-class life to then want to take a pay cut of half? I'm like, because it shouldn't be like this.
Yeah.
That's why. And I'm willing to make that sacrifice, but I can only make that sacrifice because my partner, my husband, is supportive. He also grew up in difficult circumstances and understands the impact of this work on people's lives. So there's no way that I could do this without, two people who I learned all of the campaigning work from, actually several people I learned campaigning work from in 2018, Molly Cowan and Ernst and Nick Taylor, they still help me to this day, even though they're doing different races and different jobs. And so because it really takes a lot of support and effort and to be able to pull off a race like this. We've now fundraised about $130,000, which is about $30,000 more than where we were at this time last cycle.
Yeah.
Because people believe in the work, they believe in the effort.
Exactly.
And so at all levels, we're supported either through fundraising or by sweet notes that people send, or, hosting Zooms like this where people learn about the race and, learn about us. And, I am also somebody who's, and my other dog's at the door now. It's like in and out, in and out, in and out, all day long. So, the work could not get done if I did not have the support of my husband and, friends, and have an excellent campaign manager, and then volunteers who believe in the work. So yeah, I have a really strong. My siblings are very supportive too, which is great.
Oh, good. Good.
So yeah.
Well, the fact check fairy came through, and we found out Blasio's
Actually,
salary is
$200K, but
dumb.
that's not even.
Thanks,
so
fact check fairy
wildly
Vajika.
wrong. Thank you very much for that. And I'm gonna be quiet for most of the rest of this. It's not my interview anyway.
No,
I
but
just like watching.
yeah, I really, it's something where it really makes sense. The whole rich retired people are the only ones who have the time, who have the money to be able to take such a serious pay cut in these types of things. And then that's why all the power still stays where it does, because those are the people who are like, oh, it's fine, I'm representing your community. You're not though.
Yeah.
You're not.
It's not to say that there aren't people who are of means that couldn't represent us. It's just there's something to be said about the disproportionate imbalance of individuals of those means representing large swaths of the population and don't understand the impact of a lot of the policies and the laws that are created. I mean, feel the impact of it,
Right.
And so that's where it's really important to me that our legislature begins to resemble how New Hampshire actually looks, because we'll come up with solutions that actually meet the needs of individuals who live here. So hopefully I'm one person. Now there's Becky, and she's a mom, and she's a disability rights lawyer, and she's incredible. And so we have a very shared interest in changing and shifting the way that politics looks and feels, and so it's more like an invitation to others to participate. Absolutely. It is gatekept by individuals who want to just be held in power. So for us, it's about creating a sense of invitation to participate in democracy, not, well, we're just chosen people, give us all the power, we'll do the work, don't you worry. It's more of like, well, let's build a bench, let's build a bench. So even in this process, you're building the bench, and it's even in this process now, I recruited a woman from Ware to run for House seat, and I've been very supportive of her. I was on a Zoom with Cory Booker a couple weeks ago, and he said something I really believe in. He said, when people say they want to run for office, show up for them, show up and support, show up, pick up the phone when they call, offering them how to navigate the process. Like, it's more than just saying, yeah, good idea, you go do that. No, because it's isolating, and it's, I often would describe like being a candidate sometimes feels like being roadkill on the side of the street, and everybody's picking you to death because they just want everything from you all the time. So unless you're like resolute in who you are as a person and have that strong support system, and sometimes being the strong support system is being someone who's been through the process and then offering your insight and support while someone else goes through it. And so when I invite somebody to run for office, I'm there for them. It's like Becky, I was, there for her. There's to the editor, doing call time, giving her money and, doing things to help her, and, picking up the phone when she's like frustrated or doesn't know how to make sense out of something, and same thing with Jenn Alford-Teaster, who's running in Ware, Hillsborough too. Same thing with her. She'll sometimes call and freak out. How do you do this? I gotta get to work. I gotta do this. And I'm like, honey, you're fine. You figured out, we'll get this done, and like letting her know she's not alone, We're doing a Zoom tomorrow night with some, a new woman, a young woman who's running in New Hampshire in the House, Stephanie Highland. So helping support her while she builds her campaign. So for me, it's about, creating a sense of invitation to participate, not creating process so, you can gatekeep for others. I mean, that's been the problem, right? We've had people keeping us, and really want to take and dismantle that process. So it's more inviting for others, and they can see the real joy in the work.
Yeah, way more inclusive. I like that. Of course, it has to be.
Yeah.
This process belongs to all of us. So when people act like it's a gatekeeping situation, that's not about serving democracy. It's about serving your ego. And so for me, making, sharing it is how it should be. We're all engaged in this process to some degree, whether you like it or not, even if you decide you're not going to vote, which I've heard people say that too. And I think, well, then you were just relinquishing your rights. Why would you do that? And so, either influencing the process or being influenced by the process, but you can't avoid being involved.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, I'd rather just be actively involved.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to our last two questions, which is crazy, this flew by, is there anything else that you would like to add that we didn't touch on, election specifics, and where we can find you online? Well, we already found you, but where the listeners can find you.
Yes, listeners.
So if folks are looking to find out more about our campaign, make contributions, which we could always use, the website is www.jenn4nh.com. It's jenn4nh.com. I am, my email is Alford-Teaster, all one word, at gmail.com. And then my cell phone number is 603-660-6561. Call anytime. And I'm happy to talk to you about Senate District 8 and the needs here. You know, I really appreciated the questions that you asked in this process because I really enjoy talking about the foundational values that led me to this work and what will influence me while I'm at the State House. So I think you've done a good job covering those things and allowing me to expand on that. So I sincerely appreciate that. I do want to reiterate the message that for folks who are feeling a sense of despair in our current political climate, sometimes it can be really difficult to continue to do the work. Keep in mind that you might be that light for somebody else. So, you know, empower yourself to think a little bit differently about the way you impact those around you, and know that there's a lot of power in deciding to become active in the process, and grieve when you need to, but get back to work as soon as possible. So that's what I'd like to share.
Oh my goodness. That's so much inspiration. This is so moving.
Well, I ask the same last two questions to everyone that comes through the podcast. First, what is your second favorite color?
Oh my goodness. So I saw that you were going to ask me this question, and I was like, I asked Vedika, I was like, do I have a favorite color? I don't even think I have a favorite color. Don't think I have. I mean, like, I don't have one.
Do you have a second favorite dinosaur?
No, but it's funny you mentioned that. My daughter loves dinosaurs. So she told me recently she feels like a T-Rex, which, you know, is the most vicious dinosaur. So I'm a little
big head and little arms.
Yes. So no, I don't have a second favorite dinosaur. I mean, I wish I had. I mean, I don't have favorite colors. Like I wear a lot of neutral colors, I think, because I don't know why.
Would you either go like cream colored or gray?
Ooh, good question. I think it depends on the time of year. So I'm very seasonal. Like in the summertime, I wear a lot of bright colors. And then once you start to get into the fall, because I live in New England, it's a lot of puritanical colors, you know, black and white. I don't put them on the Puritan hat. You know, like, it's just a very New England thing, right? We start wearing dark colors all the time because we're basically going into mourning for the fact that it's going to be freezing for so long. You know, like Vedika's wearing a dark colored shirt today. I'm wearing actually the sweater that my husband's grandmother, it was my husband's grandmother's favorite sweater, and I just absolutely love the sweater. It has these huge deep pockets, but it's basically like wearing a blanket. You know? So yeah, so I'm very seasonal in my colors. So right now I'm heading into the Puritan colors, blacks, whites, like rich reds, things like that.
Okay.
So
I feel like that works. That's an answer to the question, right? It works. It's in the same. We're on the color wheel. It works.
Yes.
And lastly, what, in your opinion, is the best part of being a woman?
Oh, this is such an incredible question that I thought about, and I thought, well, you know, I feel like it's hard to answer this question without speaking to like gender norms. So, you know, because ways in which we experience being a woman in this world can be vastly different for so many people. For me personally, one of the things that I think most about when I think about being a woman, I think about how you know, I'm going to frame this in the form of, I learned this concept about every characteristic being a balcony and a basement. I went through this leadership training at the college a couple of years ago, and often talk about balconies and basements. So like, I'm a very impatient person. That's kind of a basement. The balcony of that is I'm very decisive. So you don't have to wait for me to make decisions. And so like you can look at any characteristic in an individual, and depending on the context, decide whether or not it's actually beneficial or works against you. And so that's true of any characteristic, any person, anywhere. And so one of the characteristics about being a woman that I think often gets used against us is, I also cherish very much, is the sense of emotional nature we get characterized with. So, like we're often characterized as being too emotional. Oh, she's all worked up, like, why is she being this? Or she's too much that, or a smile on your face, or, all these near constant coaching about us as emotional creatures. And, it's something I embrace, that vulnerability, that exposure of my emotional self. I'm also incredibly logical and cannot divorce those two things, because that emotional aspect of who I am informs decision making. Because, both economic campaign manager, one of the things we've connected on is we both have a love of neuroscience. So one of my favorite writers is Robert Sapolsky. He recently released a book called Behave, the Neuroscience of the Best and the Worst of Us. He argues in that book about how you cannot divorce emotional and logical thinking from one another, or you'd have cold-blooded decision-making that would be devoid of any humanity. And I think one of the things that we as women more benefit to be able to do is to use those emotions to make humane decisions, where men are often paced away from being seen as emotional human beings, even though they are. So they create an environment for which they reject emotional experiences, and we get to have the benefit of being able to fully live in those feelings. And for me, being a woman means using that emotional, cultural sort of, proved sense of self in a way that informs my logical decision making without being hampered by cultural norms that say it's not okay to be emotional, where men often face that. So for me, one of the greatest things about being a woman is being an emotional creature, and using that emotional, culturally accepted narrative around women in a way that informs my decision making, that enhances the humanity of the work that I do.
Wow, that was cool.
Yeah, that's such a good way of looking at it too. Yeah. Man, you're giving me all. Steve has another thing to put in a file in my brain, because like basements and balconies, that's such, it's something. You people say, like, don't always look on the good side of people, this and that. It's like, okay, but like you can acknowledge I don't know, traits that can be construed as bad, like in being impatient, but also be like, but this means that I can make very direct decisions based on, that's just so, I love that.
Well, one of the things I think in our culture we tend to do is we idealize certain characteristics, and we don't recognize that sometimes characteristics can be, it's all about context and how you apply those characteristics. So, it's like that mentality of like, if you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So you actually have a wide range of like tools in your toolbox as a human being, and it's a matter of which one you want to use and which one you're more comfortable with. So recognizing that at any moment you have a variety of tools available to you. Sometimes we just habituate or get known for certain tools because we execute them so well. They can also work to our detriment. So it's, same thing with any emotional or intellectual characteristic. And so, it's a more accepting way to see ourselves as well. So like, all of us are fallible. All of us have the potential to apply tools in a way that are not actually constructive or helpful, but maybe in moments of panic, or, if somehow we are like triggered into survival mode, we maybe execute something in a way that's not actually in line with how we see our intentions. we can keep in mind at any time we can step back and look and say to ourselves, is this really the only way I have to deal with this? Or is this the best context for this approach? And you could explore circumstance and understand that it's not necessarily that characteristic so bad about you. It's just maybe you execute it in the wrong context, and so that's one way, or maybe you find that you execute certain things in a better way in certain contexts. So like seeing yourself as a dynamic and fluid individual with lots of options at any time, and that sometimes it's just trial and error to find which contexts are served by which tools. Sometimes that's dependent on the audience of the individuals you're working with.
Yeah.
So it's a more holistic way of seeing ourselves and saying, I'm all good or I'm all bad, or this one thing I do is so annoying. When actuality, in some contexts, that one thing that you do is annoying probably has helped you in some capacity. So it's not really that bad. And who's it bad for? Is it bad for you? Is it bad for other people? Is it bad for a subsection of people?
Yeah.
So really taking the time to think through that for yourself, and managing how your impact, what that intention is in the utilization of that tool, and then the impact you're having. But yeah, I feel like women just have more emotional tools available to them that they can exercise explicitly, where men often are told, crying or demonstrative emotion or anything that feels soft, like women tend to be soft, thought of as soft emotionally, but that's not available to men, which I would say it's actually very much available to you. And we would all be better leaders and humans if we fully lived that too.
Yes. You heard that, men.
You hear that?
Yes, men. Say it. She said it. We're tired of it.
Yeah, it's a burden for men. It's a burden for women. And, for us to fully be human and alive, we should have access to all sides of ourselves. And so emotional capacity is one of them.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Jenn. You are exactly the kind of person that we all dream of holding positions of power, positions of change, because you're going to be the type of person that you are the type of person that is looking on as not just a grand scope, because you see it all, but then you're also saying, okay, what are these little subsects? What are these little things that we can do, these small things at a time, while also saying all these things together are going to make for X, Y, and Z in the end. And you are just absolutely the perfect person to be in this type of position.
Oh, thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. That's so sweet.
Oh my God. I'm like all blushing. I'm like fangirling too. I'm like, you're so cool.
Yeah, so interesting. I definitely like learning about everything that you said, and I'm going to go inform people in person about the things that you
I gave you my phone number. Call me anytime. Seriously, call me anytime. I hope we can stay friends and stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. We're definitely going to keep posted with.
And super quickly, shout out the election day so that everybody knows.
Yes. Yeah. So New Hampshire, it's November 3rd, and the absentee ballots will start to be mailed out to folks. I think 1st of October. So we'll begin to. That's why we've been so adamant about doing call time and reaching voters now, is because they'll have an opportunity to vote within the next couple of weeks. So
great thinking.
Amazing.
New Hampshire.
Amazing. And thank you, Herstoryans, for tuning in again. Subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends, tell your postman, tell everyone. We really want everyone to be able to get to hear these stories from these incredible women that we get to talk to every single week. You can follow us on the social medias for some extra inspiration on Twitter.
At the Her Story Pod.
Instagram.
At Women of Her Story Podcast.
And you can visit our website at
ofherstory.com.
Oh, you got that one off book.
That's the
you
one,
didn't even have to
one.
read it.
He's a natural.
Until next week, be safe, stay healthy, and show the world what you're made of.
Bye.